The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. Thick mud covered the roads leading to the old auction yard, and the air smelled of hay, rust, and disappointment. Farmers and traders stood under dripping hats, shouting over the sound of restless animals. Somewhere among the chaos, tied to a fence post and shivering, stood a horse that nobody wanted. Her name was Daisy, though no one at the auction knew that. To them, she was just Lot 17. A thin, chestnut mare with one cloudy eye and a faded brand on her flank. Her coat was dull from neglect, her hooves cracked from standing too long in mud. Each time someone walked past her pen, she lifted her head slightly, hopeful for just a second, only to be ignored again. "She's no good," muttered a man in a worn-out denim jacket, shaking his head as he walked by. "Too old. Too small. You can't get nothin' out of that one." Daisy shifted her weight nervously, ears twitching. She didn't understand words, but she understood tone. And what she heard, over and over, was rejection. By noon, most of the buyers were gone. Only a few animals remained, the ones nobody bid on. A tired clerk was going through the last paperwork when a delivery truck rolled up, splashing through puddles. A young driver jumped out, soaked to the bone. "Hey," he shouted. "I got a pickup for the Harper farm." "Said they bought a mare?" The clerk squinted. "Harper farm? They didn't buy nothin' today." The driver frowned, pulling a folded paper from his pocket. "Got it right here, Lot 17 to Harper Farm, delivery by 5 p.m. Signed and stamped." The clerk sighed, rubbing his temples. The rain, the confusion, the endless paperwork, it all blurred together. He shrugged. "Fine. Take her. She ain't worth keepin' anyway." He unlocked the gate, slapped the mare's flank, and muttered, "Off you go, girl. Maybe they'll figure out what to do with you." The driver led Daisy into the trailer, muttering to himself about bad directions and late deliveries. The gate clanged shut, and the truck pulled away, tires splashing through the mud, heading toward the wrong farm. Hours later, as the rain began to ease, the truck bounced along a gravel road bordered by endless fields. In the fading light, a wooden sign appeared, "Hollis Farm, private property." The driver squinted. "Hollis. Harper, close enough," he muttered, pulling into the muddy yard. He unloaded Daisy, handed the paperwork to a teenage boy who had come out of the barn, and said, "Here you go. Harper's new horse." The boy looked confused. "We didn't," but the truck was already gone. The mare stood there in the drizzle, ears drooping, looking lost and unsure. The boy glanced toward the barn, where an older man was working under the soft yellow glow of a lantern. "Dad," he called. "You'd better come see this." The man turned, tall, broad-shouldered, with hands rough from years of work. His name was Thomas Hollis, and he hadn't bought a new horse in over a decade. When he saw Daisy standing there, thin and trembling, he frowned. "Where'd she come from?" "The auction," his son said, handing him the papers. "But it says she's supposed to go to Harper's place." Thomas studied the horse in silence. He could see the bones under her coat, the exhaustion in her stance. "Somebody made a mistake," he said quietly. The boy nodded. "Should I call them?" Thomas looked at Daisy again. Her one good eye watched him, wide and cautious. There was something in it, not fear exactly, but a faint, flickering hope. He sighed. "No. Not tonight. Let her stay. We'll figure it out in the morning." He took the lead rope gently, his voice softening. "Come on, girl. You look like you've had a rough run." And just like that, by mistake, by fate, or maybe by something greater, Daisy stepped into the barn that would change her life forever. Morning broke over Hollis Farm with a pale, golden light that spilled across the wet fields. The storm had passed, leaving behind the smell of rain and earth. Inside the old wooden barn, the air was thick with the sound of animals stirring, the shuffle of hooves, the rustle of hay, the slow rhythm of life returning to normal. Thomas Hollis pushed open the creaky barn door, coffee steaming in one hand, and stopped short. For a moment, he'd almost forgotten the strange visitor from the night before. There she was, the thin, chestnut mare, standing quietly in the far stall, head low, watching him. His son, Eli, was already there, brushing her coat with slow, careful strokes. She didn't sleep much, Eli said without looking up. Every time I moved, she'd lift her head and stare at the door like she thought someone was coming for her. Thomas stepped closer, setting his mug down on a bale of hay. Poor thing, he murmured. Probably been bounced around her whole life. The mare flicked her ears toward his voice but didn't move away. Her ribs showed under her coat, and her mane was tangled with burrs. But up close, Thomas noticed something else, a quiet strength, a patience that spoke of survival. He studied her for a moment, then turned to his son. Feed her, but not too much yet. Her stomach's gotta get used to it again. Eli nodded. What do you think she was used for? She's not built for racing or pulling. Thomas sighed. Hard to say. Maybe somebody's pasture ornament. Maybe a workhorse till they ran her down. He reached out, resting a hand gently against her neck. Her skin flinched at first, the reflex of an animal that had been struck too often, but then relaxed beneath his touch. Easy, girl, he said softly. You're safe here. The mare exhaled through her nose, a soft sound that filled the silence between them. Eli smiled faintly. You think we should tell Harper they dropped her off here by mistake? Thomas looked at her again. Something about the way she stood there, quiet and steady, made him hesitate. Maybe later, he said finally. Let's see how she does first. They spent the morning cleaning her stall, brushing her coat, and cutting away the tangles from her mane. Every now and then, the mare would glance at them both, her single good eye bright and curious. By noon, she had started to eat, slowly, cautiously, as if she still couldn't believe the food was hers. Eli sat on the stall gate, watching her. I think she's pretty, he said. Thomas chuckled. You always did root for the underdog. That night, after supper, Thomas went back out to the barn. The sky outside was clear, stars stretching across the horizon. The air was cold enough to sting his lungs. He leaned on the stall door, watching Daisy, though he still didn't know her name, sleeping on her feet, her breathing deep and steady. He thought about calling Harper again, about setting things right. But something in his gut told him to wait. Maybe it was the way she'd looked at him that morning, or maybe it was the memory of his late wife, who'd always said, sometimes the things we don't ask for are the ones meant for us. He stayed there a long time, the quiet of the barn wrapping around him. When he finally turned to leave, the mare opened her eyes and lifted her head, as if sensing him go. He smiled faintly. Good night, girl, he whispered. You're home, at least for now. By the third day, Hollis Farm had begun to feel different. It wasn't anything anyone could name, not a change in weather, or luck, or fortune. But something quieter. As if a presence had settled over the place, gentle but undeniable. Thomas noticed it first. The air felt lighter when he walked through the barn, the animals calmer. Even the old draft horses, usually grumpy in the mornings, stood quietly in their stalls. And at the center of it all was the new mare, the one who wasn't supposed to be there. Eli had named her Daisy that morning without even asking. She looks like a daisy, he said simply. Kinda plain, but strong. Thomas didn't argue. The name fit her somehow. She was still skittish, flinching at sudden movements or the sound of boots on wood, but each day she grew a little braver. When Eli came into the stall now, she didn't back away. She'd lift her head, ears pricked, and wait for him to speak. You like him, don't you? Thomas murmured one morning as he leaned on the stall gate, watching his son scratch the mare's neck. Guess he's got that gentle touch. Eli grinned. She listens when I talk to her. Look. He clicked his tongue softly and stepped back. Daisy followed, slow but deliberate. Then he stopped, raised a hand, and she froze, perfectly still. Thomas blinked. You trained her to do that? Eli shook his head. No, she just does it. It wasn't normal. Horses didn't respond like that unless they trusted you completely, and trust like that didn't happen in 2 days. Thomas stepped closer, studying the mare's face. Her good eye gleamed with something sharp. Not fear, not instinct, but intelligence. There was more to her than met the eye. Later that afternoon, a truck pulled up the driveway. Thomas recognized the man climbing out, Henry Harper, owner of the neighboring farm. Broad, red-faced, and always in a hurry. "Tom!" Harper shouted, waving a stack of papers. "You got my horse." Thomas wiped his hands on his jeans, walking over. "She came here by mistake, yeah. We were gonna call." Harper huffed. "Damn auction mixed up the paperwork. That mare's useless, Tom. Won't pull, won't breed, scared of her own shadow. I was gonna sell her off to the glue yard." Eli, who'd been listening from the barn door, clenched his fists. "She's not useless," he blurted out. Harper looked at him and smirked. "Kid, that horse is more trouble than she's worth." Thomas frowned. "Maybe. But she's here now." Harper extended his hand. "So? You'll want her gone, right? I'll take her off your hands." Thomas hesitated. He looked back at the barn, where Daisy was watching from the stall, her ears twitching nervously. Something about her gaze stopped him. "She settled in," Thomas said slowly. "Eating good. My boy's taken to her." Harper laughed. "You can't afford another mouth to feed, Tom. You barely keep the farm running as it is." Thomas's jaw tightened. He knew Harper wasn't wrong, things had been hard lately. But something deep inside him, the same instinct that told him when storms were coming or cattle were restless, whispered, "Don't let her go." He folded his arms. "Mistake or not, she's here. We'll keep her." Harper's smile faded. "Suit yourself. Don't say I didn't warn you." The man drove off, the truck kicking up a trail of dust. Eli turned to his father, wide-eyed. "You mean it? We're keeping her?" Thomas nodded slowly. "We are." Eli grinned, running back into the barn. Daisy neighed softly, almost like she understood what had just happened. That night, Thomas sat alone on the porch, staring at the stars. He thought of Harper's words, the debts piling up, the long winters still ahead. Keeping another horse didn't make sense, but it felt right. And in the stillness of the night, he heard something faint, the sound of hooves in the pasture. Not frantic, not fearful. Just steady, rhythmic. A heartbeat against the earth. For the first time in a long while, Thomas smiled. "Guess you're home now, Daisy." The next few weeks changed everything. Daisy's stall became the heart of Hollis Farm. Every morning, Eli rushed to greet her before school, brushing her coat and whispering to her like an old friend. Thomas pretended to be indifferent, but more than once, Eli caught him standing quietly by the fence, watching the mare with a look that wasn't quite disbelief, but something close. Daisy was stronger now. Her ribs no longer showed, her coat had a healthy sheen, and her good eye seemed to glow with purpose. She had a way of moving that drew attention, calm, graceful, aware of every sound. Even the other horses followed her lead, as if recognizing her quiet authority. But the biggest change came one cold evening in late November. The sky had turned the color of lead, and the air hung heavy with the promise of snow. Thomas was mending a fence near the north pasture while Eli filled water troughs by the barn. The day had been uneventful, until Daisy suddenly started pacing in her stall. Her ears twitched, her nostrils flared. She let out a sharp, restless snort and kicked at the door. Eli frowned. "Hey, what's wrong, girl?" But Daisy didn't calm down. She tossed her head, eyes wild, and reared slightly, slamming her hooves into the wood. She wasn't scared, she was trying to say something. Eli ran to the door, peering out toward the fields. Nothing but wind and fading daylight. He turned back to her. "What is it?" Then a sound cracked through the air, faint at first, then louder. A shout. Eli! His father's voice, distant, strained, coming from the north pasture. Eli's heart jumped. He grabbed his coat and sprinted toward the fence line, the cold air slicing through his lungs. The sky had darkened fast, and by the time he reached the slope behind the barn, the first flakes of snow were already falling. "Dad," he yelled. Then he saw it, Thomas's truck half sunk into a ditch, one wheel spinning uselessly, the fence-post pile scattered across the ground. His father was pinned near the front tire, his leg caught under a fallen beam. "Dad!" Eli dropped to his knees, trying to lift the wood, but it was too heavy. "I'll get help." Thomas shook his head through gritted teeth. "No time. Snow's coming hard. You need leverage, the tractor," but the boy was already running back toward the barn, panic surging through him. The wind howled, and the snow thickened fast. When he reached the barn, Daisy was still pacing, her muscles taut, her eyes bright with fear. "Dad's hurt." Eli gasped. "He's stuck." He ran for the halter, but Daisy didn't wait. Before he could open the gate, she pushed it with her shoulder, breaking the latch clean off. Then she bolted out into the storm. "Daisy, wait!" Eli shouted, chasing after her. But the mare knew exactly where to go. Through the wind and snow, she galloped toward the north pasture, her hooves pounding against the frozen ground. The storm whipped around them, but Daisy didn't falter. When they reached the ditch, she stopped beside Thomas, snorting and pawing at the ground like she'd done this 100 times before. Thomas looked up through the blur of snow, disbelief flashing across his face. You brought her?" Eli shook his head, out of breath. "She came on her own." Daisy moved closer to the fallen beam, pushing her shoulder against it. The weight didn't budge at first, but she didn't stop. She grunted, straining with every muscle in her body. Eli scrambled to help, pushing from the other side. The beam shifted, once, twice, and then, with a sharp crack, rolled free. Thomas gasped in pain but managed to pull his leg out. Good girl," he murmured, voice breaking. Eli looked at the mare, his eyes wide with awe. "She knew," he whispered. "She knew you were in trouble." Daisy stood over them, breathing hard, steam curling from her nostrils in the freezing air. Then, as if satisfied, she lowered her head and nudged Thomas gently with her nose, once, twice, before stepping back. That night, after the storm passed, Thomas sat by the fire with his leg wrapped and his mind racing. He replayed every second of what had happened. The storm, the shout, the mare breaking free and finding him. It didn't make sense. No ordinary horse could have known. He looked toward the barn through the frosted window, where Daisy stood quietly under the soft glow of a lantern. Maybe Harper was right, he muttered. She's no ordinary horse. But as he said it, his voice softened, almost reverent. She's something better. The storm left the land wrapped in silence. Snow covered the fields, blanketing fences and tracks alike, turning Hollis Farm into a still painting of white and gold under the morning sun. But inside the barn, life felt louder, warmer somehow. Daisy stood quietly, steam rising from her back, while Eli brushed her mane with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. She saved you, he kept saying to his father. She really saved you. Thomas sat nearby, his leg bandaged, a blanket over his shoulders. He couldn't stop watching the mare. Every few seconds, she would glance back at him, her one good eye shimmering in the light. He'd seen loyalty before, from dogs, even from people, but not like this. This was something deeper, wordless, ancient. When the doctor came later that afternoon to check Thomas's leg, he listened with disbelief as Eli told the story. The horse broke out of her stall? The man asked, raising an eyebrow. On her own? Eli nodded fiercely. And she ran straight to the ditch. Like she knew. The doctor chuckled, wrapping his tools. Sounds like a smart animal, that's for sure. You got lucky, Tom. But Thomas wasn't smiling. He wasn't thinking about luck. He was thinking about the way Daisy had looked at him as she pushed against that beam, fearless, determined, like she wasn't saving a man, but a friend. That night, he went back to the barn alone. Daisy turned her head as soon as he entered, nickering softly. And her eyes followed him. The sound she made, soft, deep, grateful, was the closest thing to a thank you he'd ever heard from an animal. "You shouldn't even be here," he murmured, "but maybe this was where you were always meant to end up." When he left the barn, the lamp light caught her good eye. It shimmered like a promise in the dark. Winter tightened its grip on Hollis Farm. Days grew shorter, nights longer, and the wind carried the kind of cold that bit through bone. But inside that small patch of land, life had changed. Daisy had become the heart of it all, not just for Thomas and Eli, but for the whole community. Neighbors stopped by just to see her, bringing apples or sugar cubes. Even people from the next county came to watch the miracle mare who'd saved a man's life. Thomas didn't care for the attention, but he couldn't deny that it brought something else, hope. For the first time in years, the farm didn't feel like it was dying. Harper's words, "You'll get tired of feeding miracles," still echoed sometimes, but every time Thomas saw Daisy lift her head to greet him, he felt the opposite. This horse had given the farm its soul back. But fate, it seemed, wasn't finished with them yet. It started with the wind. Sharp, restless, too dry for winter. The snow had melted early that season, and the grass beneath turned brittle and brown. One evening, as the sun fell low, Eli was stacking hay near the barn while Thomas worked by the fence line. Daisy grazed quietly nearby, her coat catching the last light of day. The air was calm, too calm. Then, from the woods beyond the ridge, came a faint crackle. At first, Thomas thought it was just frost breaking underfoot. But then he smelled it, smoke. He turned fast. A thin column of gray was rising from behind the tree line. "Eli!" he shouted, dropping his tools. "Get to the house. Call the fire crew." The boy froze. "Fire? Now?" Thomas's voice thundered. Eli bolted toward the farmhouse, his boots slipping in the half-melted snow. Thomas sprinted to the barn. Inside were 3 horses, Daisy and 2 old work geldings. He threw open their stalls, shouting, "Out! Go!" The geldings obeyed, bolting into the pasture. But Daisy didn't move. She stood still, ears twitching, eyes fixed on the ridge. "Come on, girl," Thomas urged, grabbing her halter. But she pulled against him, her body tense. Her gaze wasn't on the fire, it was on the farmhouse. Thomas frowned. "What are you?" Then he heard it. Faint, muffled, Eli's voice. A shout for help. Thomas spun around. "Eli!" Smoke had already begun drifting toward the house. The old phone line must have failed. He took one step toward the porch, but Daisy moved first. She tore free of his grip and galloped toward the house, her hoofs pounding through the dirt. "Daisy," he yelled, coughing as the wind shifted, carrying embers and ash. The dry brush near the fence line caught, flames leaping in streaks of orange. Thomas tried to follow, but his bad leg slowed him. He stumbled toward the yard, choking on smoke, his heart hammering. "Eli!" Through the haze, he saw it, the old barn lamp near the porch had fallen, flames licking up the wooden steps. The boy was trapped inside, coughing by the window, trying to open it. And then Daisy appeared. She ran straight through the smoke, her mane glowing in the firelight. With a wild neigh, she reared and slammed her hooves against the half-open door. Once, twice, 3 times, until it burst open. Thomas saw Eli stumble out, clinging to the mare's neck. Daisy turned, shielding him from the sparks as they ran through the yard together. Thomas's knees nearly gave out when they reached him. He caught his son, pulling him close, coughing and shaking. You're okay," Eli nodded weakly, his voice hoarse. She came for me." Thomas looked up, but Daisy was gone. The smoke thickened fast, swallowing everything. Thomas shouted her name, his voice breaking. "Daisy!" No answer. Only the hiss of burning wood and the howl of the wind. It took hours for the fire to die down. The volunteer crew from town arrived too late to save the barn. It was gone, nothing but blackened beams and smoke. But the house still stood, and Thomas and Eli were safe. When morning came, the farm looked like a ghost of itself. Gray ash coated the fields, the fences scorched and broken. Thomas searched all morning, calling her name. Eli followed, eyes red, boots sinking into the soft soot. They found tracks leading toward the northern ridge, Daisy's tracks, but they faded near the creek. "She saved us again," Eli whispered, voice trembling. "And now she's gone." Thomas looked toward the horizon, jaw set. "No," he said softly. "She's still out there. She always finds her way home." He looked down at the hoofprints one last time, then at the farmhouse that still stood behind him. He could almost hear the echo of her hooves, the heartbeat that had kept them alive. "She was sent here for a reason," he said. "And I'll never forget it." Days turned into weeks, and the fire became a memory written in ash. Hollis Farm stood charred and quiet, its fences half-burned, the barn nothing but black skeleton beams against the winter sky. But even in ruin, there was gratitude, because Thomas and Eli were alive. Still, there was one thing missing. Every morning, Thomas walked the same path to the ridge, calling her name. "Daisy." His voice carried across the empty fields, echoing off the canyon walls. No answer. Only wind. Eli followed him every time, his eyes searching the horizon, his hope fading a little more each day. "Dad," he said one morning, "what if she's gone for good?" Thomas didn't look at him. "She's too strong for that." But as the days passed, even he began to wonder. Neighbors came by, bringing supplies and kind words. Some offered horses, others offered help rebuilding. But every conversation ended the same way: "That mare of yours, she was something else." Harper showed up again too, standing awkwardly at the gate. "Heard what happened," he muttered. "I'm sorry, Tom." "You were right about her." "I was wrong." Thomas only nodded. "You can say that again." Harper rubbed his neck. "If she's still out there, she deserves better than we gave her." Thomas's jaw tightened. "If she's still out there," he said quietly, "she knows where home is." The snow melted early that year. The farm, though scarred, began to heal. The fields turned green again, the fences got mended, and a new barn slowly took shape. But the space in Thomas's heart, and Eli's, stayed hollow. Then one evening in early spring, everything changed. It was just past sunset. Thomas sat on the porch, a cup of coffee cooling in his hand. The sky glowed in streaks of orange and lavender, the kind of beauty that always made him feel small. Eli was inside finishing chores, the sound of dishes faint through the open window. That's when he heard it. A sound he hadn't heard since the night of the fire, soft at first, then stronger. A rhythm. Hooves. Thomas froze. The coffee mug slipped from his fingers, shattering on the steps. He stood slowly, his heart thudding in his chest. "Eli," he called. His voice cracked. "Eli, come here." The boy ran out, alarmed. "What is it?" Thomas didn't answer. He just pointed toward the ridge. At first, there was only dust, glowing gold in the fading light. Then a shape emerged from it, tall, proud, unmistakable. Daisy. She was thinner, her coat streaked with dirt, but her stance was steady, her head high. She walked toward them with slow, deliberate steps, as if she had traveled through 100 miles of wind and silence to come home. Eli gasped. "It's her." Thomas couldn't move. He just stood there, eyes stinging, until Daisy reached the fence. She stopped a few feet away, looking at them both, first the boy, then the man, before lowering her head. Thomas took a step forward. Then another. His voice trembled. "You found your way back, girl." Daisy exhaled softly, brushing her muzzle against his sleeve like she'd never left. Eli was crying now, his voice breaking. She came home, Dad, she came home. Thomas smiled through the tears, stroking her mane. Told you she would. The mare let out a quiet snort, and in that moment, something shifted in the air, like the land itself exhaled. The next day, the whole town came to see. People whispered in awe as Daisy stood calmly in the rebuilt pasture, sunlight gleaming off her coat. Someone asked Thomas how she'd survived, how she'd found her way back. He just smiled. Some mistakes, he said softly, are really blessings in disguise. Reporters wanted interviews again. A magazine offered to feature her story, the miracle mare who came home. But Thomas turned them all down. She's not a story, he said. She's family. That night, as the sun dipped below the hills, Thomas and Eli stood by the fence, watching Daisy graze in the soft evening light. Eli looked up. You think she knows? Knows what? Thomas asked. That she saved us twice. That she changed everything. Thomas smiled faintly, eyes never leaving the mare. Oh, she knows. She was never just an animal, son. She was sent here. Eli frowned. Sent? By who? Thomas took a deep breath, his voice gentle. By whatever keeps the world spinning when we lose our way. Spring melted into summer, and the farm began to breathe again. Fresh paint covered the barn walls, the fields turned green, and laughter returned to the house that once echoed only with loss. But through it all, one figure remained at the center, Daisy. She was older now. Her stride slower, her mane streaked with silver, but her presence was stronger than ever. Every morning, she'd greet Thomas and Eli at the gate, nickering softly as if saying, I'm still here. People still talked about her, the rejected horse who'd come to the wrong farm, saved lives, vanished, and returned home. But to Thomas, she wasn't a legend. She was a reminder, of grace, of second chances, of what it meant to be guided by something unseen. Years passed quietly. Eli grew taller, stronger. Thomas grew older, slower. The world outside the farm changed, but Hollis Farm stayed the same, humble, steady, full of small miracles. Then came the autumn morning when the air turned crisp and gold, and the sky hung heavy with stillness. Thomas stepped out of the house, leaning on his cane, and called, Morning, girl. No answer. He walked to the barn, the boards creaking underfoot. The smell of hay and sunlight filled the air. And there she was, Daisy, lying peacefully on her side, her head resting on the straw. Her eyes were closed, her breathing calm. Eli found him kneeling beside her, his weathered hand resting gently on her neck. Tears shimmered in the corners of his eyes, but his face was soft. She waited, he whispered. She waited till we were all right. Eli knelt beside him, silent. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The barn was quiet except for the faint hum of wind slipping through the rafters. Then, as the light shifted, Daisy exhaled one last time, a slow, steady sigh, and the air grew still. Thomas stayed with her for hours. He brushed her mane, murmuring words only she could hear. When the sun began to dip below the ridge, he finally stood, his voice barely more than breath. Thank you, old girl, for everything. They buried her at the edge of the pasture, beneath the oak tree where she used to stand at sunset. Thomas carved her name into a smooth stone and placed it by her grave. Daisy, the horse that changed everything. That night, the stars came out early. Thomas sat on the porch, staring at the sky. Eli brought him a cup of tea and sat beside him. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, Eli said softly, You think she knew what she meant to us? Thomas smiled faintly. She didn't need to know. She felt it. Eli nodded. I wish I could thank her. Thomas looked toward the fields, the moonlight painting the land in silver. You already did, he said. By living the life she gave back to us. Years later, when Thomas passed, Eli took over the farm. He rebuilt the fences, planted new crops, and raised his own children there. But no matter how much time passed, he never changed one thing, Daisy's grave. Every season, he'd clear the weeds, polish the stone, and tell the story again, how a horse that nobody wanted showed up by mistake, and saved us all. People listened, smiling, some with tears in their eyes. Some thought it was just a nice story, a local legend. But those who visited the farm on quiet evenings swore they sometimes heard it, faint but real, the sound of hooves in the distance. Not wild or hurried, just steady and familiar. And on the stillest nights, when the wind came soft from the ridge, Eli would look up from his porch, tip his hat, and whisper, "Good to see you again, girl." Because some bonds, no matter how unlikely, no matter how accidental, don't end when life does. They simply change shape, moving from earth to memory, from memory to legend. Daisy's legend became part of Hollis Farm itself, woven into every sunrise, every breeze that swept across the fields. And long after the world forgot the mistake that brought her there, the farm still stood, thriving, alive, and loved, because of her. They called it a mistake, but sometimes, the wrong road leads you exactly where you were meant to be.